Taking care of the house and kids was always considered the wife's responsibility, right? So making your husband do these tasks would mean you're not doing your job properly as a wife. My mother-in-law couldn't accept the idea of her son doing any housework or childcare. She believed that since he provided for the family, I should handle everything at home without complaining. I felt helpless in the face of her anger. I couldn't even speak up to defend myself. She reminded me that I owed everything I had to my husband and called me ungrateful. She even criticized me for not doing the laundry myself, saying she wasn't a maid. My husband didn't stand up for me, which hurt even more. It felt like both of them were looking down on me. My breaking point came when my mother-in-law hinted that if my husband divorced me, I wouldn't be able to survive on my own with our daughter. I'm Kathy, a 30-year-old office worker. I met Steve in college and we started dating. We decided to get married when we both started working. Soon after, I got pregnant and had our child. Because of my irregular work hours, I changed jobs around the time of the birth. Now I work full-time with fewer overtime hours. After getting married, I realized that Steve often relied on his mother's opinions to make decisions. So I was surprised when he brought her along for important discussions. While we were searching for a new house, I was discussing options with my husband. The living room here is spacious and the shopping area is convenient. What do you think? I asked. But instead of giving his opinion, my husband turned to his mother for her thoughts. Mom, what do you think? He asked. I couldn't help but feel frustrated. The sunlight isn't very good here, and other places might be better, I pointed out. Yeah, I thought the same, my husband agreed. It seemed like his mother's opinion always came first. Eventually, we settled on a place that she approved of. I didn't mind it, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of dissatisfaction. Even when it came to buying furniture or appliances, his mother would tag along. Hey, I think your mom is busy. Why don't we go just the two of us next time? I suggested, hoping to have some alone time with my husband, but he insisted that his mom's opinion was important. Subtly hinting that I wanted to make decisions just with my husband didn't work. Occasionally, during weekdays, my husband would skip dinner at home and go to his mother's house to eat. Since I was working, not having to prepare dinner for him was a relief, so I didn't question it much. His mother was happy to have her son visit occasionally, and I didn't want to cause any tension between us. As years passed, our daughter grew, and we started discussing building a new house. My husband was calm about it, and when his mother wasn't around, he spent time playing with our child. I wanted to build a new house where the three of us could live peacefully. I'm worried about Mom's future. How about we all live together? Out of the blue, my husband suggested that we should live with his mother. I knew she'd love to live with her son and granddaughter, but I was totally against the idea. Living with her meant constantly tiptoeing around her feelings because she never listened to my opinions. To her, her son was everything, and I felt like I was just in the way. If we lived together, I'd have to see her every day, and I wanted to avoid that at all costs. But your mom wants to stay near her current home, right? She has friends there and doesn't want to move too far, my husband reasoned. I knew she was attached to the area she knew well. However, if we moved near her, it would mean a longer commute for me to the office, which I wasn't thrilled about. I showed my husband several land options that a realtor had gathered. They were in areas with plenty of parks, nature, and convenient shopping, and they were also close to train stations. The fact that they were near his mother's place made him give his approval. I was relieved that we could steer clear of living with her. But after that, she started coming to our house often. My husband welcomed her, and I couldn't refuse her visits. While I understood her desire to see her granddaughter, my daughter didn't warm up to her at all, always crying whenever she saw her, which made me anxious. I wanted to relax on my days off, but I couldn't unwind when she was around. Can't we spend weekends just as a family? I suggested to my husband. I always feel like I have to be on my best behavior when your mom is around. Mom is family too. It's you who's making it awkward on your own, he replied, not understanding my feelings. Whenever she visited, my mother-in-law would criticize my cooking and housekeeping, saying it was to educate me as a wife. If something wasn't clean enough, she'd inspect everything closely. It was exhausting. I was working full-time and doing my best to clean the house on weekends, but it was always stressful when my mother-in-law would come over and point out things I hadn't cleaned yet. Her criticisms hurt, especially when she commented on my cooking skills, saying I didn't even have the basics down. Even when I tried my best, it never seemed to be good enough for her. My husband would join in, echoing her criticisms, which was tough to swallow. It was especially frustrating to see him suddenly become more assertive in her presence. I finally decided to talk to him about it when his mother wasn't around. If you have any complaints about me, can't you tell me directly? You don't need to wait for your mom to be here, I said. But he just shrugged it off, saying he only remembered when she mentioned it. His response left me feeling even more frustrated. As a couple, I wish we could be more supportive of each other, but it seemed like an impossible task. Our arguments about his mother became more frequent, especially as our daughter started elementary school. Then, I received a call from my mother, informing me that my father was unwell. My mother was struggling to care for him alone, so I decided to go back home and help out during breaks from work. During this time, I left our daughter in Steve's care. She was growing more independent and even started helping out around the house. She understood that I was under a lot of stress, and her cooperation was a huge relief. One day, my mother-in-law showed up at our house and started scolding me fiercely. "Steve is doing everything for the child." "What are you thinking?" she exclaimed. I apologized, explaining that my father's health was deteriorating and I needed to be there for him. But she didn't seem to understand, insisting that housework and childcare were solely my responsibilities as a wife. She even suggested that if I cared so much, I should handle those duties first before anything else. It was clear that she didn't share my belief in prioritizing family in times of need. Her fierce demeanor left me speechless. She couldn't accept the idea of her own son doing housework and taking care of the kids. "Who do you think earns the money you live on? Don't forget that you owe it all to Steve. You're really ungrateful," she scolded me harshly, while my husband stood by silently, offering no defense. It wasn't like we solely relied on Steve's salary. I worked too. But my mother-in-law insisted that everything was thanks to him. There were times when I had no choice but to ask Steve for help, especially with tasks like laundry. But even then, he seemed to harbor resentment, especially knowing how angry his mother would get. As I juggled housework, childcare, and caregiving, Steve's treatment of me worsened. I wanted to handle the housework myself whenever possible. But when I truly couldn't manage, I asked him for help. "At least take care of your own things," I pleaded. But he seemed oblivious to my feelings, retorting, "Isn't that what a wife is for? Why should I have to do it?" Despite earning less than him now, Steve acted arrogantly, reminding me that if we divorced, I couldn't live with our daughter. My salary had decreased when I changed jobs, and I had prioritized it to have less overtime because our child was young. Steve started making unreasonable demands, even threatening divorce over trivial matters. "If you really want to focus on caregiving, clean the house spotless every day before you go," he'd say, fully aware that I couldn't manage that with my full-time job. He criticized the meals I prepared, saying the variety was too small, and he refused to eat store-bought ready meals, adding to my exhaustion from cooking elaborate dishes. Since then, I started taking our daughter with me when I visited my parents' house, no longer expecting anything from my demanding husband. I stopped caring much about him and reduced the effort I put into pleasing him. My mother loved my daughter dearly and was always happy when we visited. Emma, my daughter, adored her grandmother and always enjoyed spending time playing with her. "Could you come, but are you pushing yourself too hard? Your face looks tired, and I'm worried." My mother noticed my fatigue right away. "It's okay, Mom. I'm really relieved that you can take care of Emma," I reassured her, feeling guilty for relying so much on her during this time. Amidst the grief of my father's passing, my mother and I discussed the inheritance. It turned out that my father was wealthy and owned several properties, including the mansion we called home. The house was large enough to be considered a mansion, old but well-maintained and still very livable. Originally, my parents had lived there together. When my husband first came to meet my parents before our marriage, he was surprised to see the mansion. The area was popular as a vacation spot due to its good transport links and abundant natural beauty, which my parents were deeply attached to. "Mom, you should continue living in this house, right?" I assumed she would inherit and stay there, but her opinion was different. "I think this house is too big for just me. Maintaining the mansion would be difficult for my elderly mother," she explained. After discussions, it was decided that I would inherit the house and my mother would move to a conveniently located apartment using the inheritance. After my father's funeral, I stayed at the mansion with my daughter to sort out his belongings and handle the inheritance procedures. I left the shopping to my mother and daughter and worked alone when suddenly my mother-in-law and husband barged in. "What's going on? Why the sudden visit?" I asked, taken aback. "I hear you inherited this mansion," my mother-in-law said, looking around the mansion curiously. "It's spacious enough for all of us to live together comfortably." Confused by her words, I asked again what she meant. "We're moving in today. I'll thoroughly train you to be a proper wife to our family," my mother-in-law declared with a grin. I couldn't help but laugh at her absurd statement. I looked them both in the eye and said, "A wife for this family? Who are you talking about? I'm single, you know." "Huh? What are you talking about?" they asked, clearly confused. "I've already filed for divorce, so we're strangers now too. Too bad there's no wife left for you to train, huh?" I revealed. They were shocked, their eyes wide open. They'd probably never thought I would actually go through with it. "There's nothing to forgive. Steve is the one who initiated the divorce," I continued. "Don't get cocky. A wife shouldn't oppose her husband," my mother-in-law retorted, becoming agitated. But I was done with their manipulation. In fact, just before my father passed away, I had submitted the divorce papers that my husband had been using to threaten me. Even while I was caring for my father, my husband didn't help at all. I had run out of patience with him, but neither he nor my mother-in-law would listen to what I had to say. My anger with my mother-in-law reached its peak. "It's ridiculous to think that just because I'm your daughter-in-law, I should obey everything. A daughter-in-law is not a maid," I asserted. I didn't care about being disliked by her anymore. I was no longer her daughter-in-law. But my mother-in-law lost her temper and grabbed me. I struggled desperately, but she overpowered me. "Stop. Let me go," I pleaded. Realizing I couldn't handle this alone, I called the police. As they tried to restrain her, she lashed out and hit an officer. She was taken away to the police station. My husband stood there stunned, unable to comprehend that we were divorced. Later, he came to my workplace, looking disheveled and defeated. He had fallen into gambling due to stress and financial struggles. Without his mother's support, he was lost. He asked me to reduce the child support, citing financial difficulties, but I refused, reminding him that we had agreed upon the amount together. "You said you wanted to do everything you could as a father," I reminded him. He clicked his tongue unhappily, realizing the situation had changed. My ex-husband's attempt to reduce the child support disappointed me. From my point of view, if he hadn't gambled, he could afford to pay child support, I thought. It was disappointing to see his lack of responsibility as a father. "It must be tough on just your salary," he said, suggesting we try again. But the idea of remarrying just because of financial struggles irritated me. "Who would remarry you? I'm absolutely done with mama's boys," I replied firmly. "What did you say?" He reacted violently, showing no awareness of being a mama's boy. "You can't decide anything without your mom, can you? The house, furniture, appliances. You consulted her about everything," I pointed out. Despite his objections, I had more to say. "I know you even went shopping with your mom to pick out your clothes. That's what people call a mama's boy," I added, hitting a nerve. He seemed visibly frustrated. "You always mocked me for my low salary, but I won't let you say that anymore," I asserted. Surprised, he refused to believe that I earned more than him now. After changing jobs, I was appreciated for my diligent work and managed to get promoted. "Now I earn more than you do," I informed him confidently. Faced with my response, he fell silent. Moreover, I had inherited some assets, so I was living comfortably without him. Now I don't have to be forced to do household chores, and I no longer have to deal with a nagging mother-in-law, which is very comfortable, I added. He then suggested sharing the mansion and other properties I inherited. "Sorry, but you have no rights to them," I explained. "It's all your fault for filing for divorce on your own," he blamed me. "If you did nothing wrong, we wouldn't be divorced," I countered. I reminded him of his lack of support when I was caring for my father. "That's because you didn't manage the household chores properly," he argued. Realizing he had no intention of supporting me as a spouse, my love for him cooled. "It's unreasonable for me to work the same hours and still be the only one handling housework and childcare," I argued. But he insisted. "Housework and childcare are a wife's duty. It's wrong of you to push that onto your husband." No matter how much I explained, his mindset wouldn't change. It seemed like the influence of his mother from his childhood still lingered. My ex-husband, who caused a scene at my workplace, was escorted away by security. Later on, both he and his mother found themselves in a tough financial situation, and had to sell their family home. They moved to a rundown apartment and struggled to pay child support while battling their gambling addiction. Despite their hardships, they couldn't break free from the cycle. As for me, I'm focused on my work, and with my mother's support, I am happily living with my daughter. I've noticed that I smile much more now, which brings joy to my daughter as well. Instead of spending my days worrying about my ex-husband's and mother-in-law's moods, I'm determined to live life on my own terms and set a positive example for my daughter. Now I must raise my daughter by myself, and this situation has made me realize the importance of parental education. I want to instill in my daughter values of compassion, empathy, and helping those in need. No matter how tough things may get, I've decided to face them with a smile.